keep this presentation as concise as possible while covering the basics. So there might be times when questions may arise. So I can't stress this enough. Please feel free to ask questions. All right, that being said, let's move on with the presentation. So what can you expect from this presentation? What can you expect from this app? So I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So that being said, you are pretty much focused on getting user input from the end user and being able to bind the front end and back end while adding logic. And the displaying lists part is what makes the app look pretty, is where you will be adding images to your list, and you'll be uh, adding images of food, and you'll have a title of that food, and a tip calculator has been used in this case because it although it is an essential part of an app, of a food ordering app, but it's also important to notice that it's a very good starting point for somebody to start with that and get user input. Also, that being said, these two are initially going to be separate apps, and hopefully in the next module, we'll be able to combine them and add some navigation to this. So moving on. So the tip calculator is going to teach you about classes inheritance, and it's not going to, directly teach you, because the meat of the tip calculator is going to be creating the XML layout, which is pretty much designing the front end, and then in fact calculating the tip, which is adding some business logic and then binding that so that it actually works. So assuming you well, I don't want to assume, since I did notice that a lot of people did not attend the first one. Classes inheritance, that's why I'm going to go into a little bit more depth into classes inheritance and how it plays a role in this situation or in this regard. So the scrollable list. So using lists is a very important aspect of creating most apps. So I think getting a good handle on being able to do that is very important. So there are two elements to that, two major elements at least. One is the recycler view, and the other one is the material card view. The recycler view is what allows you to list out any kind of tags or any kind of text or images. And the material card view is just to make the image and the title look pretty. So you wrap it in the material card, and that is what you see. That is just an example. That's not how the food app is going to look, but it's going to be just switched with some images of food and titles of the food. Now, these things I am going to go in depth in, so don't get overwhelmed by these terms. So don't worry, I'll be covering these topics separately. And again, let me know if I'm going too fast or if I'm not understandable or you have any questions at all. Moving swiftly on. So the tip calculator and the scrollable list of food is going to be developed simultaneously. And then in our next unit, we'll be combining them and making that into one app. And not only will that be one app, but we can also add some more navigation to maybe, get the name of the driver who's picking up the food and delivering it to you. So for now, it's just going to be separately developing these two components of the app. And the combining part or the navigating part is going to be the unit after this one. So stick around for that, not like now, but in the future. I did want to add this quote. So it's dream big, start small, most of all start. So this presentation at some points might get a little overwhelming, or it might get, you might start losing a handle on what you're learning. So don't get intimidated. I started where everyone did. So just, keep your eye on the goal. So classes inheritance. So I have only dedicated one slide to this, but I did want to give you some idea of what we're going to be doing with classes in this project. And when an arrangement where classes are organized in like a hierarchy or of parents and children, that is when inheritance comes in. And a lot of programming is dependent on this parent child relationship. Even literal key value pairs are dependent on that. So any class can be the base class of a class hierarchy or a parent of other classes. So in this case, you see the view here is the parent or superclass, and the text view is the child or subclass of the parent. So the text view would inherit all the properties of the parent class. And a common benefit of creating a superclass is to contain properties and functions that are common to all its subclasses. So I did want to show you guys an example that will be coming up of how Kotlin decided to demonstrate this idea of classes and subclasses, and I think it made sense. So I thought it was worth putting it in the presentation. And then also another benefit of creating a superclass is to contain, any kind of, for example, here, text view is also a superclass of edit text and button. So edit text not only enables you to view the text, but it also allows you to edit the text, so that it's not only a read-only property, but you can also edit the text. So for example, vegetables, right? Vegetables have properties common to all vegetables, but you can't create an instance of a non-specific vegetables because you don't know its shape or color. So for example, I know that view is a vegetable, but I don't know if text view is a tomato or I don't know, like lettuce. So we don't know that yet, but we do know that it's a vegetable. So we're for sure going to say that view or superclass is going to have properties of a vegetable. What could be the properties of a vegetable? Well, it could be nutritious. So that's just an example. So that is the basis of a parent class and a subclass and modifying classes in that hierarchy. That being said, I do want to move over to the Kotlin Playground, and I want to demonstrate what they used as an example in their documentation to explain classes and inheritance. So if I'm going to pretty much just not going to type any code here, I'm just copy paste the code, and the reason is because this is more of a topic that I don't want to spend too much time on. So only if questions arise, I'm willing to answer them if there's any kind of a problem. So I'm going to of course explain what the code does here. So the code here is pretty much it's giving you the properties of a house, and then what it's doing is so if you see, this is the dwelling or the house, and then what it's doing is it's inside this abstract class, which is dwelling. You have abstract values, and I will get into what abstract means, but for now, let's just see what the class is doing with other subclasses. So the abstract class, in this case, the parent class is dwelling, and you have the floor area, has room, and get room. So the purpose of this whole program is to pretty much figure out whether or not the dwelling has any room in it. So, with the vegetables example, you can see here that the floor area, has room, and get room are going to be common to, or rather, a better example would be, those are functions. A better example would be these variables. So building material and capacity are going to be common to any dwelling. They're not going to change. I mean, their values might change, but the variable itself is common to any kind of dwelling that is going to exist. So very simple. With the vegetable example that I gave earlier, it's completely correlates to that. Now, all this code does eventually, when I run it, is you see in the main function here, it has square cabin, capacity, and has some like if conditions later on in other functions, where if the residence or capacity exceeds the residence, then you got a room. Otherwise, you don't get a room. So a very simple if-else condition logic here, and that's what it does with the rest of the program to figure out what the capacity is and what the floor area is. And then it tells you whether or not you have room or you don't have room. But the objective of this program is to make you understand that the variables that were declared here, where did it go? Here, have been used in all the subclasses, right? So what does that tell us? That tells us that the properties of the dwelling has been incorporated into other subclasses because we need it in other subclasses. So that is the general idea of having a class and subclass, so that you don't need to be redundant with your code. You don't need to be replicating code every time you do something with another subclass. So you can easily call those variables in these subclasses. So that is the general idea of using classes, parent classes, and subclasses. So moving back to the presentation. All right, so I hope that was clear enough. But again, like I said, feel free to ask any questions in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, so I'm just having a quick look at the chat here. All right, cool. All right. Now this is the meat of what we're going to be doing today. Well, it's one of the major elements that we're going to be dealing with today, and it's creating an XML layout. Now, we are dealing with a language that's called Kotlin, and which is dedicated to Android. Other languages also have a layout system, which allows the programmer to pretty much create a framework that encapsulates the more specific elements of that program. So similar to parent class and its subclasses, you have a parent layout, and nested in that, you may have edit text, text view, radio button, radio group, or switch, like you see on the screen. Now, these are the UI elements that you'll be using. This is all you're going to be using for the tip calculator. And since the list doesn't have any kind of interactivity with it, this is all you are going to be using for the tip calculator. Now, these 5 elements here, or I should rather say, yeah, I guess elements is the right term. And these things are what you're gonna be using. And this is all that you need to be concerned about for the tip calculator part. And we're going to be seeing how these elements fall into place and how these elements interact with each other to actually make it a good and user-friendly experience. And also add logic conditionally in terms of whether or not, if the switch is on or off, or which of the radio buttons is selected. So moving on, there's pretty much 5 steps to it. You start the project, read and understand the XML, build the layout in XML, add tip options, and complete the rest of the layout. Now, while I was saying about other languages before, what I was saying was that, for example, Angular does not use XML in their layouts. Angular uses other types of binding like JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is, you could say that it's also used here, but Angular pretty much just directly uses JavaScript even for the layout part. But here, when you're creating like a mobile first app, most times you would be dealing with XML, because when it's mobile dedicated and when it's not just a web app that is served on the front end of a computer, but when it's on a phone, you need some kind of a layout that tells the phone that this is what it's going to look like on a smaller screen, and that's it. So in this particular case, we are making an app that is dedicated to a phone. So an XML you might not need when it comes to a completely just a web app, which is a web application if you're going to on a website, but you're most likely going to be dealing in 99% cases with XML if you're creating a phone app. And that being said, I also want to say it's very important to understand how XML works, because HTML, if you notice, is a lot of XML. So you'll see right now as we go through the presentation that XML looks eerily similar to how HTML is constructed. And although HTML is, we have not gone into a lot of how elements are encapsulated into HTML. In this, we're not going there here, but what I'm trying to say is syntactically, it's very similar. And you'll see that when in the future, if you ever end up working with HTML, which might be the case, if you're going to be a programmer, then it's going to be easy for you to handle it than if you don't know any XML at all. So Get excited for this. I think it's pretty cool, and I think you will too. So if you are going through the presentation with me, and if you are following along, then this is for you guys. And with this here, I also want to use this time to share a document with you guys. And what that document pretty much is a reference doc that you guys can use for any of the code that you find yourself stuck in. So you'll notice that sometimes I'll copy and paste code here, and I don't want you to feel lost when I do that. So this reference document will help you to, this is something I put up together so that it can help you understand what's happening when I'm like copy pasting certain code that doesn't exist on the screen beforehand. So I sent a link to that in the chat. So feel free to go through that and make sure you access it with the USF email, but it's not necessary to use it hand in hand. You're going to understand well without it. But this is just for people who are rigorously following along with me during the creation of the project. So to start the project, you create a new project. So I'm going to jump towards Kotlin, which I have open right here. And let's create a new project, right? So it's pretty straightforward. Go to File, New, and hold on, and New Project. Now, when you go to New Project, what you want to select is something called Empty Activity. Now, once you select that, click Next. Right, now here, what you want to name the project is Tip Time. Right, you want to name the project Tip Time. You can name it whatever you want, but I'd suggest you are consistent with what I'm doing to follow along easier if you are. And you click Finish, and that should create the project for you. And it created it on my second screen, so I'm going to drag it over. All right, so it is initializing the project. It's going to, in my case, it's called Tip Time 2 because I have a Tip Time project already. Don't worry about that. It's fine. So now this is the main activity is where I would say your backend is, right? And this is where a lot of your logic will go in terms of calculating the tip itself. And it also segregates your front end to your back end. So you see two main activities here. You see main activity .kt, which is the Kotlin file, and activity underscore main.xml is the XML file, which is the layout, like I said, the front end of your application. So going back to the presentation, so this just tells you to make sure your minimum API level is of 19 KitKat. If you miss that, then feel free to just delete the project and start again. But it shouldn't be a huge, concern. But moving on. So here we're talking about reading and understanding the XML, right? And when I say reading and understanding is getting your grip on what XML is pretty much used for. The reason why I went with inheritance in the beginning with subclasses was for this reason. So here you can clearly see an example of how the constraint layout and the text view, and there's text inside, and then there's text view and then constraint layout. So the constraint layout is, you would say, the parent class in this case. Text view is a subclass which has a text element that says hello world, and then you close out the text view tag and then the constraint layout element or the parent class. Now, this structure here clearly tells you that it is very dependent on like a parent and child relationship, like I was saying earlier. And you will see as we write code that this is how pretty much most of the things will be structured. So you have to understand that this is important. Just understanding the relationship between a subclass and a parent class. So that being said, we're going to be going to our main application, and then we're going to go into activity underscore main. Now, this is the XML we talked about. Now, this is the screen that you're going to see first. And please let me know if there's any problems you looking at it, or again, if I'm going too fast. I don't want to, slow or speed anyone up. So let me show you what we do after this. So once you reach this screen, you should go on the right top corner right here, and you click Code, right? So clearly you can see that there is 3 views here. There's design, split, and code. And the code view will tell you what the code looks like of your design, of your layout. And then you will see that this is what I was talking about, where the constraint layout is the parent class and the text view is the subclass. So you have to understand that the line with the text view is the start of the tag, and then here that is the end. And you'll also notice that this has a closing tag, but text view does not have a closing tag. So some tags might have closing tags, and sometimes some tags only might have a closing bracket. Now, that being said, this is a very basic layout of what it looks like. So let's go into split mode and see what this looks like, right? So you see that it highlights for me what I'm at. So right now I'm at text view. That's why it's at this text view. I can do what I can manipulate this. But if I go here, it's now you see that it's vanished, but it's pretty much just trying to tell me that I'm on the parent screen right now. So that's all it's doing at this point, and it's a very simple and basic layout. So you should be good there. If you have anything that you don't understand here, let me know. And these other attributes here that you see, you'll see that why they are there as we move on further with the project. Now it's time to get to the building part of the XML. So let's get to the building part. So what you see on the right is what we're going to try to end up with. And for that, we're going to put some layout stuff and make sure that whatever we do is in accordance of how we want the layout and how we want everything to be set up. Now, right now we're just building the layout in XML. So we're just building how it looks. We're not adding any logic. We're not adding any kind of like event listener. An event listener is pretty much when you click a button and something happens, right? So we're not adding any of those properties yet, but we're just designing the way it looks. So enter split screen, right? And then it says delete text view, and we're going to see what the rest of the steps are. But let's start with deleting text view. All right. So let's go back to my code, and I'm going to be deleting the text view. So let me just go ahead and delete it. So you pretty much just have to delete it. The reason why we're doing this is because we want an empty screen, right? We don't want hello world or anything out there. It's what it's what it defaults to. Now it said delete text view completely. So if you want, you could do that. But I would say that actually, let's stay consistent with the presentation. So why don't we? When I initially made the presentation, I decided on just using the text view and nesting the edit text in there. But let's stay consistent and add an edit text tag here. So the edit text tag is what is it? How is it different from text view? Well, edit text, as the name suggests, allows you to edit the text instead of just having to view the text or just read the text. So let's get started here. So I'm going to add a edit text attribute, right? It's going to suggest that for me, and I just clicked enter, and it's going to ask me. It already like put some attributes in there, and it's asking me what I want the width of the layout to be. I can do layout of width to be match the parent, so that it's like you see on the right here that it filled itself according to the constraint layout or the parent layout here, so that automatically adjusted itself. And then for the height, we'll do wrap content because we don't want to match parent there, right? Because we're just going to match it according to whatever's in the edit text field. And after this, what we're going to do is we're going to another important element of this whole idea of modifying XMLs and adding these tags is that all tags have something called an ID, right? And why do they have that ID? Well, it's to be able to identify what tag to modify in the case of if you want to manipulate that data somewhere else in some other file. Because not everything we're going to be doing is going to be in the activity underscore main XML, right? So how do you declare that ID? Well, everything starts, Android is a keyword, and most of what we're going to be doing is going to start with Android, and it's going to be taken from that package. So with Android, and a colon is just pointing to another subdirectory, and we do ID, right? So that's the syntax to declare an ID. And then it's going to recommend adding the @ plus ID slash, and that's how it's supposed to be. So we're going to do that. And then eventually, give me 1 second. Just want to charge my laptop here. All right. So once that's done, then it's, well, you need an ID, right? You want to call it something. So in this case, we're just going to call it plain text, right, for now, so that we're familiar with what's happening and why we did certain things we did. Right. So then something else we need to specify is edit text, right? So it's edit text. So what do you guys think that we are missing here, right? So if I fix this right here, and I close it out, and so it's let me give you a hint. So it says it's edit text, and it says that there's something missing here, and it's telling me, what is it telling me here? It's saying that I'm missing what? Can someone unmute their mic and tell me?
To like some text you can edit.
Exactly. So, well, you're very close, Justin. So I would say if anyone else wants to give it another shot, I'm gonna put it back on the screen here. And if anyone else, Justin was pretty close. If anyone else wants to jump in and give it a shot, I'll tell you I'm missing an attribute. What kind of an attribute am I missing? It's on the screen actually, if you look closely.
I'm gonna guess it's the input type.
Yep, you got it. So you got it. So it is the input type, and we need some kind of a input type here so that it knows, because edit text always will take in an input, right? So you need something that tells it, well, the input type has to be a certain type. In this case, I don't want to call it like a data type because it's not, because it also accepts like types that are specific to Kotlin. So that would be in this case text, right? So let's just do text and finish that off. So now you hopefully see that there's some kind of a syntax error. I think I didn't close it yet. But all right, so let's not I think it's fine, but I think it's behaving unusually. because I'm presenting right now, but it's fine. I guess we can keep going. I'm sure we'll be able to debug what it is as something fails, right? So moving on, although this should be fine for now. What you're seeing here is right. There's no reason why, because it says that it's not looking at input type right now, and I do have input type, but I think that there's no binding currently, and that is why it's behaving unusually. But moving on, you want to make sure that the app dot layout or colon dot layout or this edit text here is placed somewhere on the screen, and I actually think that is why this is throwing an error here. So let's see how we can add this layout to a specific position on the screen, because right now at this point it is nested in the constraint layout, but it doesn't know where to go. It doesn't. I've told it that it's the width is the match. It has to match parent, and I've told it that the height is so much. I've only defined the dimensions, but I haven't not told it where on the screen it has to be placed. So right now, if you see, it's just on the top of the screen because that's what it automatically assumes. So in order to take care of that, another two attributes that we need, one of them is app layout. And the first one you see there is not the one you want to use. The second one is what you want to use, which is to start off. And to start off, parent, I'll say. So here what I'm basically pretty much saying is that, you would start the edit text element at the start of the parent, in this case, the constraint layout. And I keep using constraint layout, but you have to understand the constraint layout is synonymous to parent class. And then you add something else here, which is app layout, another constraint, right? So now you have to tell it so it's saying to start off parent, and then you have to also say so if you're reading left to right, it'll say to start off. So if you were to like create an application in a different language, then you would have to consider that edge case. But when you say to start off, it assumes that it starts from the left. Now, another thing you want to specify is layout constraint of, constraint, and then you would have top to top of, right? And here you would specify, again, parent. So you see now that red, it's not throwing an exception now because it knows where it is in the parent, right? So it knows where to go. So that is the basics of building it out. And you also want to make sure that you have the input type here, and you want to make sure that you have an ID. Now, if I remove the ID here, it's still going to say that it's fine, but it's good coding practice to always have an ID to an attribute. So make sure that is in place. Now let's see what we have, where we are at the presentation, right? So it says add cost of service text field by adding edit text tag. So now when I'm saying that, what I mean is you need to pretty much modify the existing text field into cost of service. So instead of making it plain text input, we're gonna make it into a cost of service, if you will, in there. So let's name it cost of service. Right. So what is cost of service? Well, it is just the total of your bill of whatever you ordered, and it's going to calculate the tip from that total amount. So cost of service is now the ID, right? And what would the input type be in this case if it's a if it's your total? What would be the input type here? if you had to just guess.
You
It
know,
doesn't have
some
to be
type of number. I'm not
Yep.
sure. Sweet.
Exactly. Exactly. So it would be some type of a number. So in this case, it would be preferable that it's a number decimal, right? Because it could be in it could be, you know, in like, you know, you could have, of course, a boolean, a float, and not just an integer. So this is the way to declare it in Kotlin. Most XML actually would be able to handle this, but you know, if you want to remember like that, be my guest. So another thing we're going to be adding is so right now it's just empty. So how does the user know what that is, right? So in order to display like a placeholder, if you will, what you need to add is something called Android hint. Now this Android hint here pretty much is, you know, tells you what to put on the screen when there's no input currently, so that the user knows this is what I'm doing with the field. So let me put in cost of service. While I'm typing here, although small, you can see that, let me see if I can zoom in. Oh, there we go. So you can see that it is saying cost of service, and it's a placeholder that when it has no input, that's what it's going to show us. All right, let me take a sip of water. And allow you guys also to take in all this information. But let me fix that typo. So you see that clearly it, I don't like this word hint, to be honest. I think it should be called placeholder, but that's what Android likes to call it. And that being said, let's see here. So now we're seeing that this field isn't, you know, it's like literally the width of the parent. It looks ugly right now. It's like overflowing. So why don't we add some padding to the parent layout? So if we add some padding to the parent layout, it's like a margin, but it's not going outside the parent. It's going to add padding inside the element instead of adding it outside. If I were to add a margin to the parent, you won't even see the margin because it's going to just, because the parent is the edge of the screen. Right. So if we're going to be adding it to the parent, where would I add it? Which layout would I add it in? You know, there's only two layouts here. So I would add it in the constraint layout, which is the top one here, because this is the parent layout and this is the child. So I would add it here. And how would I add padding? That's very straightforward. It starts with Android, right? And I just do, and it's going to suggest that. And then I would add, let's say I want to do 16, right? And 16 is that's the edge right here. So you see it like, it's a little bit neater now, you know, it looks better. So, and DP is, you would like, it's display pixels, I think. And it's basically like uh the pixel width, and the best way to like uh to size or position elements is through pixels. The most precise is through pixels, and I think px should also work here, but I'm not sure. But I know that. Okay, so you see px did work, but it's very precise. So I think dp is a unit that is much more easy to work with. So DP allows you to position it, and I think you're better off using it because with lesser numbers, you can modify where your application is or where your elements are placed on the phone or on the screen. So keep in mind this added a padding inside the element, like right here inside the parent element. We didn't change anything here, but it's still, you know, if it, since it's wrapped inside the parent element, it pushed it more towards the inside. So far so good, I hope. Let me know if there's anything that you guys want me to you know, redo or revisit. So the next thing we're going to do is add a text view, and that text view, all it's going to do is pretty much, it's going to tell us, well, it's going to just say that, you know, this is what this field is here for, right? Because we need to point towards the field and say cost of service, but we need some kind of a subheading, if you will. So to just make it look better. So in that case, we're just going to be adding, a pretty basic text view, because we're not going to be needing to edit that text because it's just a header, or I would, in this case, just a read-only view, right? So whenever you create an attribute, you'll see that it like automatically does that, and that is because it's always preferable to have a specified width and height. I don't even think that the tag would work without it. Let's find out. So let's see if I get rid of this. Yeah, it's not going to just zoom the width and the height, but it might in some cases where it's like just a radio button or just a button. But since it's a text view, it's expecting you to put in a height and a width. So let's do the same. Let's do wrap content and wrap content. And since it's like text view, like the width and the height, when I say wrap content, it's going to just wrap it with the with the parent element. So it's going to be it's smart enough to identify that the size of the edit text is here, and that is a certain width, right? And it's matching the parent, and that is a certain height. So it's smart enough to understand that, okay, so this is what I need to do with text view as well. And I honestly think Kotlin is very smart, by the way. Like when I was doing this, I was pleasantly surprised with how much it was able to help me out. So if you are looking to make an app, then Kotlin is the way to go. It's very futuristic. So what am I trying to add here right now? What did I say was very important for every attribute? If you guys are still with me.
An ID.
That's right, sir. So an ID, Let's call it service question. You want to call it tomatoes if I want it, but we want to understand what we're doing. So let's be cordial. And next thing you want to do is add the actual text that you want to display, right? What would that be? Let's see. That would be, how was the service? Something like how was. And that's it. And you can see that it's completely off right now, and it doesn't know where to go. So it is just wrapped it. So you see right now, like if you see on the right side of the screen, it tells you like the dimensions of it. It highlights the dimension, and you can see that it has wrapped it to the amount of text that's in there, and it has wrapped it to the width of what it is in there. So to fix that, what we're going to do is add another. We did this in the edit text as well. It's the last two attributes in the edit text, which is app layout, right? And constraint, and then we're going to do to start off. And in this case, it's still going to start off. So when I say start, you have to understand this is from the left side. So it's still going to start from the parent, right? So it's going to still start from the parent, because you want to start at the edge of the left side of the screen. But what I do have to specify though is where do I want it at the bottom of, right? Because it's in the middle of nowhere right now. It's at the top. So I would do to bottom of, right? That's what I'm saying. It's so readable when you're coding with Kotlin. And like all these suggestions here, like if somebody doesn't know what to do, like they could just browse through this and see, oh, okay, there's height, so stuff like that. But it's very easy to code with Kotlin because they empower people who don't have any experience. So let's do to bottom of. And in this case, you'll see that here's when the ID comes in handy. How would I be able to specify where I would want to place it if I didn't have an ID on the edit text? So I put ID in, and what would the ID be? It's pretty obvious, right? Cost of service. Boom, it's right there now. So I don't know, these tiny victories are pretty cool to me. I hope they are to you too. But and I close that out. Now that is very a basic little layout that we created, and we have cost of service, and we're asking how was the service, and then we're going to be adding more elements at the bottom here. So that was a very basic, construct of what we're doing, right? So we started with the parent layout. Then we have two sub I would say layouts, or not layouts, I would say sub classes, which are called elements. And these elements, one of them is edit text, where you can actually use you can input something there. And you have the text view, which is just a read-only text field. So you have those two things here, and we specify the height, width. We have an ID, and we also have where to place these two things. All right. So you have to understand what I have here is pretty much most likely to go in most text views and most edit text, if not all, right? Because you would need these things in most elements when you're creating a product. So that being said, let's go back to our presentation, and looks like we already added the service question. So we deleted text view, we added cost of service, adding to add the edit text tag, and we reviewed the edit text attributes, right? Because we want to make sure we understand what's going on here. So if any of you have a problem with any of the attributes here, let me know, right? And we added the service question through a text view right here. Yep. So that was that. Moving on to the next part. Now the first fun part. So we add tip options and add user interactivity. And you'll notice that the reason why XML is so widely used is because this parent-child relationship is so easy to manipulate with an XML, right? Like you see an example right here, which like tells you that, there's a radio group, and then there's a radio button inside the radio group, and then you're good. That's all you need. Like you have the group, and then you would have the button that incorporates all of the features of the group, so that they can interact with each other. And for example, what kind of features, right? For example, if I select good here, then amazing should automatically be deselected. Do I have to code that in? No, I don't have to code that in, because radio group takes care of that for me. But if I added if I added radio buttons, then every time I click another one, this would also be selected, because this is completely a separate element, right? So since it's wrapped inside the radio group class, it knows that these three things are related to each other. So let's get started with that. Let's add a radio group to our screen. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to start just like we did with the other attributes. We're going to start a radio group attribute. Like I said, it's always going to do that. We're going to wrap it, wrap the content, and wrap it again. And then we want to specify our ID. Let's call it tip. And don't worry about these flags right now. I know they're annoying, but they're going to go away, I promise. Then what do we want to specify, right? How do we want our radio group to look? Do we want a radio group to be vertical, or do we want our radio group to be horizontal? So I'm going to go with vertical for this one. So Android, and what is the syntax for that? It's just called orientation. So that is the syntax for that. It's called Android : orientation, and then you have two options. You have vertical and horizontal. I'm going to do vertical in this case. Now we know how to deal with placing things, right? Because we did that with the other two attributes. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do the same two attributes, constraint, and we're going to do start of, because we also always want to specify where to start from the left. And in this case, it will be parent. And we're going to do another one, 2 for the bottom. And in this case, it would be what? Which one?
Would it be the service question?
Yep, you got it. Service question, you're absolutely correct. And because we want it below that, we don't have any other choice. We don't want it, of course, we don't want it on top of that, so we'd rather have it below that. So thanks for answering that. And please, guys, let's make this a little more interactive. Feel free to jump in. And if you can't answer a question, ask me a question. All right, so that's what you should have so far for the radio group, if you're following along. And if you're not, then I hope you're understanding what we're doing here. So that being said, what do we need inside the radio group? And you notice that the radio group has a closing tag here, and the reason why some of these some of them don't need one is because, first of all, this here is like more like an inline element, and this here is more like an inline element. So you don't need to nest things inside an edit text. You don't need to nest things inside a text view, but there's more likely a chance that you will nest something inside a radio group, right? It's a group. So you would want to put radio button. And you would be right to think that radio button does not have a closing tag, because you're not going to be nesting something inside the radio button. Because if you want to label it, you have an attribute for it just inside the radio button attribute. So you're good inside the radio button tag. So you're good there. So width, let's do wrap it. Let's wrap it and wrap it again. And it's the safest option to go with. And you'll see that, boom, a radio button has popped up right here. And I think that's pretty convenient to be able to look at what you're doing on the screen while it's happening. And let me not forget to add an ID, right? All right, and what would I add here? Let's see, let me do, so we want the first option to be 20%, right? So let me call it option 20%. And wrap, and then we're gonna. So now what we're missing is a label, right? Like it's just a button, right? So how does the user know what they're clicking on? So we would do Android, right? And then it's the same thing as this little here, this text here, and just text, and then you can put in I'm awesome, right? And then that's all they get. No, I'm kidding. But you put in amazing, and then 20%, right? So they know what they're selecting. And you close it out, yeah, trying to be funny here, but it's a very quiet room. But thank you, appreciate that. But so yeah, so that's one button right there. You've created a radio button. Congratulations, or you've watched me do it. So congratulations for that too. So now let's say we want 3 options, right? So from here on out, you'll see that it's pretty straightforward. Okay, that keeps happening because I try to copy it a certain way that I'm used to, but it doesn't work here. So you would just copy those 3 things, right? And what I'm trying to do here is just create 3 buttons, right? It's going to be the same attributes for each. And what do you notice here? We notice that the radio button is nested in the group. So this allows us to align it without any hassle at all. So one of the biggest benefits is alignment when it comes to nested classes. So obviously we can't name everything the same. So let's name this hold on. So we have good, we have okay, so 18 and 15%. right? And I'm going to let my studio load up. There we go. All right. So we're going to call it 18. Oh no, let me actually name it 18. I hear somebody. I'm glad. Thank you. And then we have let's do 10. All right. I think that's what we have there. All right. Oh, it's 15. 10 is too low. 10 is too low. All right, 15. So 15, 18, and then now we change it up here. We change that to good. That's going to be 10, or sorry, what was it, 18%?
When you're making the ID tag attribute, how
Yeah.
come you have to put the @ plus ID backslash in front of the actual like option 15%?
Yeah, so here, right here.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
include that.
that is just syntactic sugar. That is just something syntactic that Kotlin likes to do. So for example, if I were to put a Android ID here, I can't actually because it's already exists, but let me show you. If I were to put a Android and then I put an ID here, then has it lets me choose if you a specific ID. So it's so that I can select multiple or select a specific one if I needed to. You know, because this ID would it does not only apply to when you're assigning it, but in the future you might use ID to you know, reference another attribute, right? So that is just how Kotlin syntactically tells you to reference other attributes if you want to. But if I were to just put in some text, it doesn't recognize that it's the ID of the attribute. It just thinks that it's a string or whatever. But moving on, I hope that
Okay,
cleared
thank
it
you.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
makes
no
sense.
problem. So yeah, so this is where we are at, and we can see that we're getting there. You know, we're doing some things here, and we have like a good bare bones, if you will, of our tip calculator. Okay, so now you know what would be nice. You know what would be nice, a if a button was selected by default. Um, you know, if a button was just selected and when the person is trying to enter it, and you know, instead of having like all these empty, and it's nice to have, and it's also that I'm trying to teach you this feature, which is pretty cool. So how do we specify what selection should be default here, right? And in order to do that, what we're going to have to do is go back to our radio group, which is a parent class, and we add another attribute there. You know, it's all about attributes. You add another attribute there and say it's called checked button. Right? It's called checked button, and you have again all these options here. And if you name your attributes, you know, very self-explanatory, uh, in a very self-explanatory way, then you would know that which one to go for, you know, immediately. And you would just select that one. And that is why it's good practice to not only name them, but name them in a way that you can reference in the future if you want to do that. So, you know, this is what we have here. So what does this help us do? Well, all this does is when you would enter the tip calculator, one of these options would already be selected. Because you know, this is not a toggle, it's a list of options. So you can't toggle a radio button. So it would be kind of weird if nothing was selected, because that's not how radio buttons work. Radio buttons are supposed to be, unless it's like one option, like a checkbox, radio buttons are supposed to allow you to select between things. So, but one of them has to be selected. You know, if you decide to give it to. So in this case, we're choosing amazing service to be selected. So that's what we did here. But then again, you know, to one its own. That's why Android doesn't force you to do that. But but it's good practice to conform with what we already know. So we've added the tip options here, right? So where are we in our presentation? So we've added radio group, we've added radio buttons. Now what's left? We need to add a switch and we need to add a button, right? And what does the switch do? Well, it's a toggle, like I was just saying. It toggles between whether or not, in this case, to round up the tip. You'll see that the more you use XML, you'll see that the more easier it is to introduce new attributes. So even for switch and button, you'll see that it's pretty easy to introduce them and just start playing around with them. So in order to add a switch to it, let's go back to code. And let's make sure that we are outside. And now this is important, guys. You got to make sure that you're outside certain classes. Now, for example, if I was right here, and if I was just coding like I always do, just chilling out coding, and then I do switch here, and it's not preferable to put it inside. You see that it's already creating a switch there, but it's not preferable to have it inside the radio group. If I'm coding carelessly, then that's what I do. So what I want to do is I want to take it out of here. I don't want it there. It's as simple as just what it's called, right? It's called a switch, so that's what they decided to call it, which is what we all love. So you would put in the width. Now, what would the width be in this case? Well, for now, I'm going to do a width of 0, and you'll see why I'm doing that. Let me put it in a width of 0. Right, and once I do that, I'm going to then specify the height. The height can be wrapped, right? So there's no problem in wrapping that up. And then what I want to do is I want to put in a text, right? So that actually tells me, what it tells me what I want to label it or call it. And I say roundup tip, ? Right? And then you'll see that it adjusts according to my text. That's one of the reasons why we have the width set like that. Because if you keep the width to 0, it's not going to vanish. It is doing the same thing as wrap content is doing. But the reason why we're not using wrap content here is because we want some text to show up in line with the switch. I could always add a text view, what I did here for how was the service, and then place it there. But it's just too cumbersome and just too sticky. So I'd rather do this here and set my width to 0, so that it's all encapsulated in the switch, right? Then what I want to do is position it. Let's see, where do I want it? So if I were to refer to my image here, let's see. Okay, so I want it to the end of, right? Because it's not at the start. Is it the start of the parent? No, it's at the end of the parent. And you'll see how you're wondering that, well, technically roundup tip is at the start, but you'll see that where end of and where start of can be used separately. So this might get a little confusing. So pay attention, right? So let's see. I want to do layout, and I want to do. I'm just gonna. I can't find it till end of, so I'm just gonna change this. So let's do constraint end, right? And to end of, right? I have it right there. Now, also notice, by the way, that encapsulating classes helps you just refer to parent as parent instead of wondering what the ID of the parent is, right? That is also a benefit. So there's a lot of benefits that clearly can be seen as we code along. let's do the same thing. Let's specify the layout again, and this time to the startup, and we just do the startup parent. And there you see, what did it do there? Right? So right now it's at the end of it, right? Like we designed it to be. But then when I added the startup, it like automatically split itself and became the width of the screen, right? So it knows that I can stretch myself according to the width of the parent without having a set width specified. Now, let's try this, right? Let's try not specifying this. Let's see what it does. Right. So let's try not specifying this, and let's see what happens when you do wrap content. Right? And oh wait, needs a closing tag. And so right now, what did it do? It wrapped it inside this thing here, and it's although it's in line, it's never going to stretch out like the way we want it to. So either we have two options here. Either we, like I said, make a separate text view, or we do what I did, where you would put it like this here, right? And then that automatically stretches it out. So we're saying that it starts there and it ends there. That's it. All right. That's all we're saying. That should be pretty straightforward right there. So that allows us to place it correctly. And you would wonder, why I'm not just using this view model here to like push things around. Well, there's a lot of things you can't do by just pushing things around. So it's better to get handy with XML and how to actually work with the code. And then it's still at the top here, so we need to put it at the bottom. You should know by now what that is, right? It's the same as to the bottom of it. So you're talking because it's so readable, right? So so then you would have layout and constraint to the bottom of, and then you would have your ID, and in this case you would have, now you wouldn't put it, now you have two options. Actually, you really have one option if you want to make this work, because you could put it like under this here, but you don't want to do that. You're outside the class of the radio group, so you might as well put it under tip options, right? So make sure you don't make those silly mistakes where you put it under the button itself, right? You want to make sure that classes and inheritance has to be at the top of your concerns every time. So there we go, easy, right? And why can't I change the width of here? Width of here? Well, I want to be more precise. I want to be more more in control of what's happening on the screen, because if I start changing things up here, I don't know what's happening here. I'm not in control of what's happening on the side that I cannot see. So yeah, this is what we have right now. We have a switch, we have 3 radio buttons, we have some text, and we have input. So that looks, I think so far, visually looks like where we want to go. And next we have, oh, my bad. Next we have the button, right? So we need the calculate button there. And I'm going to speed along a little bit with the button part, because I do have to cover the list as well. And it's already like 1 hour, 23 minutes. So as long as you guys are having fun and you guys are not too bored, I can keep going. But this is stuff that you already know by now. So like I said, if you're following along, then feel free to look at the reference document and see if you find that there. If you don't find it there, let me know. I can paste it in the chat. So here it's saying that by the way, what did I forget to do here? I didn't have an ID here, by the way. So That's why this is in red, because it doesn't know what ID are you talking about. There's no wound up switch anywhere. So I'm going to add an ID here. D, and then I'm going to call it round up. Boom, that should fix that. And clearly you can see that it's like pretty much the same, but just the XML attribute changed, and it's all like the same almost. It's all about positioning, where I want to put it and all that. So you know what? Let's run the app. All right, let me save it, and let's run the app and see what we get here. This is not the fit. This is the finished product. So I'm going to let it reload, and we're going to see where we are up until now. We're going to let it build. Is still running, so let's wait a couple seconds. Oh, or a minute. Yeah, Teams really starts sucking a lot of power from your computer, so it's almost impossible to run the project while I also have my screen casting. But let me know if you guys are following along and you guys run it or something, and let me know if you guys can put it in the chat if you want, and let me know if you're seeing what you want to see or if it's messing up. So while that's running, we can move on with the presentation. So here, so far, what we've done is good enough to, you know, wait. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. So while we're doing this, while Kotlin is, while the studio is getting itself together, why don't we move on, right? Why don't we add some other elements to our code? So it's a good practice to always track the strings and put it. Hey, somebody has their mic unmuted and someone's dog's barking. I think it's. All right, thank you if you unmuted or muted. But yeah, so what I was saying was that so it's always good practice to extract the strings, right, and put it in a resources tag. Operation succeeded a few seconds ago, so let's see what we have here. So yeah, it looks good, right? So we can click it, we can toggle this, right, clearly. And cost of service, that's not going to do anything right now. That's not going to at all. It's not going to work. But because we didn't add any logic yet, but it looks like we have our front end, good to function, or good to go, if you will. And yeah, so going back to where we were at. So I was saying that it's always good practice to have these strings that you have here, the roundup. Oh, not these. Sorry. These, like, especially like these the ones that are radio buttons, and well, these two. But then when it comes to cases like these, you want to put these strings in a certain resources tag under the resources folder. And the reason why we're doing that is because I think it's in values, I believe, and strings, right? And the reason why this is here, right? So all I did was I went into resources or res values, and then I clicked on strings.xml. And here, what can we see here? We can see that the app name is already specified. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put the rest of the strings that I have, and I'm going to put it in here, right? So what that allows me to do is allows me to section off a certain part of the code, so that I can reference these strings whenever I want to reference them. So let's try to, so I know that I copied everything just now, but let's try to split this and make sure that our activity main matches up. So when we go to code view, so I'm on activity main on the left, I'm on strings on the right here, and I'm going to make sure that the cost of service, so cost of service, so here, so what do I change here, right? Because there's a reason why we did this. So let's change it here. So in this case, it would be you want to whenever I say an at, Justin, like you asked me earlier, it's to reference something, right? Like I was telling Justin, and you would do you would do string, right? And then you see that all this is getting referenced here already, and you already know on the right here what it's referencing to. So it's pretty straightforward from this point. So since you know that the app ID is cost of service, you would go ahead and select that. And that is still going to display the same string that has been assigned to that. And again, you might think that this is redundant work, but trust me, if you want to scale your project or you want to scale your app, then this is the way to go. Because you can't expect to just have strings on there and do it in a certain way where it's all over the place, because you don't know, where to modify which code to see which effect where. So it's better to segregate it this way. And then we're going to have how was the service, right? So it's just called how was the service. So let's see, how was the service? I'm going to do the same for all of them, right? So this doesn't have a string. Then there was like amazing service. And then you have the cost of service, or well, good service, right? So and then okay service, right? So option 15% is okay service, 18% is good service, 20% is amazing service. Tip options, and then we have the service question. So the string is going to be how was the service, cost service. So you see that it's getting much more organized, and things are a little more robust now. Same thing you want to do with the roundup tip and the calculate, right?
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
What would be considered the back end and the front end as far as app development goes?
So the back end would be everything here in the main activity, which is where we're going to be adding our logic for calculating the tip. And we're going to be able to bind it to the front end. So in this case of Kotlin, back end would be .kt, which stands for Kotlin, and the front end is laid out in XML. And the front end also consists of other elements such as CSS and HTML. But we're not dealing with that right now because that is more towards like web app development, and it's more for like specific styling. So to answer your question, .kt would stand for Kotlin, and that would be the backend.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we're going to be dealing with that too. And I was also thinking that now that we're at 1 hour 30 minutes, I'm going to finish up the tip calculator, and then I'm going to decide whether or not to move further with the app, with the discretion of our president here, because I think it might get too long if I jump into that, if I jump into the lists, because but just putting that out there. But let's move on with our rest of our app. So so the text here is what we're looking at, roundup switch. So roundup tip is what we're looking for. Roundup, there we go. And finally, calculate, which is called calculate. Okay, and there we go. My studio is struggling once again. But you do notice that there's a tip amount on the right there. That is something I did miss, so I'm going to add that as well. The tip amount is where we're going to be displaying our actual tip, and that's going to be just another text view, guys, and it's nothing special. And in fact, I do think that I put the whole solution code for the tip calculator in that reference doc, so feel free to look at that. And if it's not there, let me know. I can add it there. And if there's any questions regarding the reference doc, if you want me to add some more code into there, let me know. I can just add some more stuff in there. It's a shareable document. Whoever has the link gets access. So right here, I added a text view. Now, let's close this thing out, right? We don't need that right now because we have the strings in that XML. And let's split our screen again and let's see what we have. Right, so you'll notice that everything is the same, right? All we did here, guys, was we switched the strings to something to a variable that we can reference. That's all we did, and everything should still be the same. And I don't want to run it right now because it's too little to run something, and I don't want to waste that time. So I'm going to move on. But let me know, guys, if you're on the same page as I am, and let me know if you're having any trouble at all understanding anything. That was a great question, by the way. So keep it interactive, guys. Thank you. All right. So
sorry.
Of course.
I just wanted to know if I don't know if I missed this, but did you already talk about like the overall app development process? Like how you go from, the general concept or idea of the app all the way to the app store?
Right. So if you want to know more about how to get the app on the App Store and this is more technical, obviously, right? But I can cover that too. But maybe by the end of this presentation, if you want me to go into that more. But this is more of how you can actually use Kotlin to create your app. This is more of how you can use the language to develop your own app. Because in this case, let me tell you, you would be limited to the Play Store. The reason for that is because for Apple, you would need to use their language, and you want to use what they call, I think, what is that language? Swift, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
you have
Swift.
To use Swift. Yeah. So you have to use Swift for their API to be compatible with your app.
Right.
Right. And I do also want to mention that there's something called progressive web apps that actually works as an app for a web page that works on your phone. So that is something pretty cool that I do want to cover in the future. So so that actually eliminates the problem of you having to become an Apple developer. You can just be a developer and do both things, which is pretty cool. But yeah, this presentation is more dedicated towards the technicality of how you can actually get your app running.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, I can go through how you can do that. It's not like it's not a huge a huge topic that requires the time that this does. So I can easily cover that. So thank you for the question.
Right. And so as far as the technicality, how would you be able to have multiple developers working on one single app? Would you have like different pages to different developers, or how'd that work?
Okay, that's an awesome question. So you're talking about scaling the app, right? So if it's a bigger app, then how do you have multiple developers work on it? The question to answer to that is when you have an app, you have two segments. It's already divided into the back end and the front end. Now, when it's already divided into the back end and the front end, you usually have like a software or some kind of a task allocator, if you will, that gives out these tasks to people in the team. And what that does is gives you a certain task. And then you, depending on whether or not you're a front end or a back end person, you get a task depending on your expertise. So let's say you're a front end, since we're dealing with front end right now, and you get a task saying there's a bug where the calculate button is too much to the left. You got to fix that. So what would you do? Okay, that's a bug. I go to my button, and then I see where does this start, right? Does it start at the parent? No, right now it does, but it starts somewhere else because of the bug, like maybe like 2DP here, right? And it's completely off. So well, all I do is fix it, and then I'm good. But this is a very minute task. So depending on the scale of the application, you would get tasks that are more like. So, for example, if you're in a startup, you would get a task that's more like redesign basis. If you're in a bigger company, you would get a smaller task like this. But that's how usually work is divided. You get task based on front end, back end, and then you get task based on whether it's refactoring or bug fixing or whatever it is. So it's not sectioned off to per se a page per person, but it's sectioned off to back end and front end. And in the front end, then you have a task, and then you have to be responsible for debugging why that issue is coming up, where to go, and where to fix it.
Okay, I think I gotcha.
Yeah. So that would be really cool though if one page was dedicated to one person, because then that person knows completely what they're doing. Because then if anything arises, then they can instantly catch the bug. But that's very hard. That's very hard in bigger development cycles in bigger companies because you have so many things going on. You would rather have people do smaller things than be oriented towards like one whole aspect of the application.
Oh, okay. So you would have different groups focus on different things. So like you would have the design group, and then you would have
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
okay.
You would have like the front end design group, then you would have the front end binding group, or and then you have a back end, or you would have sometimes you would have a notifications, someone who's solely responsible, a team that's solely responsible for push notifications, a team that is solely responsible for you know, or making the logic of the calculation actually work, so stuff like that. So the team, in this case, that's a very small thing. But in bigger companies, you would have like a team that's dedicated to UX and team that's dedicated to um, actually, like I said, push notifications or notifications. Because notifications in itself in bigger companies is a huge task, right? Being able to send all these notifications every day at a certain time, it's very automated. So you would need a team dedicated to something like that.
Okay. Do you have any resources for where somebody could find out, like that kind of development process
Right. So
in a structure?
yeah, so I can't point to a specific resource, but the best tip I can give you for that question is talk to more people on LinkedIn and people who are actually in the business. They know what's up and they're willing to help you out because they've been in the position where you and I am at. So they are out there to help you like not everybody, of course, everybody's going to be different, but their experiences can teach you more than any resource could. So that's
True.
where I would tell you to steer towards.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, so far we have the tip amount. We have all this laid out in front of us. This marks the end of creating the XML layout, and I'm hoping to finish the rest of the logic in 15 minutes. And I'm going to cater to questions for the tip calculator part after that. And then I'm going to decide whether or not to move forward with the rest of the app because the scale of this is the scope is it's bigger than just that, right? And I don't want to overwhelm you with guys with like a 4-hour presentation and making an app. So I'm going to talk with my president after this and talk with Indu here and see whether or not we can move forward. But let us finish this up before we get into any of that. So now we get to the part of actually calculating the tip, right? Because we have a good bare bones. We have stuff that takes input, but oh, by the way, number decimal that we put in there, you'll notice that you can't put in any text here. Like even if you type text, like you see the UI here automatically gives me a number board instead of a keyboard, a full keyboard, because it knows that it's only a number only input. So stuff like that, it looks pretty cool, and it's very efficient to use when it comes to a good UI experience. Also, if you guys are wondering why we're starting with something like this, is because starting from the front end to back end is a little bit more easier to understand in terms of like class inheritance and how classes are related to each other, because you can actually see what's going on. But in the case of the back end, you're kind of playing in the dark. But moving from the front end to the back end can help you more understand in the sense of like what's going on here. All right, so calculating the tip. Let's go back to our presentation and see if we've covered everything. So we covered the radio group, we covered the radio button, we covered the switch, and we covered, we covered all 4 elements here. And let's see what is in store. Now, calculating the tip, if it will stay put, is depends on a lot of binding. And what you're seeing here, I know it comes off as a lot, but allow me to explain. So there's always going to be binding with the front and the back end. The front end does not magically get information from somewhere and do things, right? It has to get information from the back end, from services in the back end to understand what to do with the information that is being input. So in this case, the first step says to enable view binding. Now, what is view binding? So like, in order to calculate the tip, your code will need to access all the UI elements to read the input from the user. So, you may recall that we use like view and button and text view. But you have to understand that front end needs to be able to see what's happening in the back end. So the first step to make the front end be able to see what's happening in the back end is to open its eyes, let's say. And the way to open the front end's eyes to what's happening in the back end is to be able to enable view binding. And that is what this first point here is all that's saying, is to be able, the front end, to see what the activities are going on in the back end. Now, this find by view ID here, all that is that it's a function that allows the backend to find view by ID. It allows the backend to interact with the front end by looking for the ID. And you have to call that. You would have to call that function. You would have to call that function every time if you don't enable view binding. Why is that? Why is that not preferable? Because it's redundant. You're typing the same code to manipulate small elements in the front end. So what Kotlin does, it has something called view binding, which you see on your right here in this diagram. And what that allows you to do is it gives it access to all of the backend, and then you can directly access it just by the view ID. So let's see here in the code example right here at the bottom. The old way would be to, you would have a variable, my button. Val stands for a value, and it's just a declaration of a variable, and you're calling that variable my button, and you're telling that my button is a button, right? You can do that by that syntax right there. You can assign it to a button, and then you're saying, so find by view ID, and R is just something that extracts the string, right? That's all it does. So you're saying that extract this string, which is called my button, and then the my button text, the string, the text that goes in the my button is a button. So you have 2 lines of code right there to just identify one single element, and then the logic aside, right? And then a little better way would be to enable binding and just say binding.myButton, so you don't have a button per se, and then you have it. So in this case, the text is just the text is being assigned to that button. And the best way would be with view binding, and without having to declare any variables, would be to just say binding.myButton.text. Now you see here, binding is a property, my button is another property. So val my button button, and the first line here is just saying that button is called my button. You're telling the code button is called my button, Kotlin. So find it and put this text in there. But in the last one, you're saying you already know my button exists because I just enabled you to see what's happening in the backend and just put the text in there. So are there any questions on what I just talked about? So this is what I'm trying to is a good, is what I'm trying to say is that being understood. Is there any kind of a holdup? All right. So that being said, the next thing would be to initialize the binding object. So we're going to get into that now, and we're going to jump back into our code and see what that means. So again, quick overview. There's two things: find view by ID and view binding. Find view by ID is an older way, which was referencing the button, and then you have to call it something, and then you have to tell the program to understand that this is what my button's called, and then find it, and then put the text in there. But the best way is to enable binding, view binding. I don't want to mess up their proprietary language, and put the text in there just like that. Boom. So let's go back into our code and let's see what initializing that means. So what you want to do here is go to your main activity now. And this is, now we're dealing with the backend, guys. So you have to understand that this is where we're starting to jump into the backend. And we have, let me see. Hold on, give me 1 second. Okay, yeah, anyway. So let's go to our backend. And like I said, I was answering, I was gonna try to say your name, but then I saw your name, and then I was like, I'm not gonna try that. But I was answering.
Josue?
Yeah, you asked me about the backend, right?
Yep.
How do I say your name?
Josue?
Josue. All right.
Yep.
So yeah, so I was answering Josue's question, and I was talking about backend, and I was telling him that main activity is where the backend happens. So now so you see there's already a framework. There's already a kind of a frame that Android, or I should say Kotlin, gives us. And what do we do with this, right? So you want to replace. There's a lot of setup that goes into the backend part, and I'm pretty sure that I added what I'm about to just copy paste in the reference doc. And I'm going to go line by line and get you up to speed onto what each line is doing. So don't worry. So what you want to do here is I'm going to replace the entire main activity class, right, with this, which I'm going to paste right here, right? Now, so I see this red, and I'm not worried because I know why that is happening, and I should tell you what this is doing now. So late init variable binding, and then it goes to activity main binding. So this line here, right, it declares a top level variable in the class for the binding object. So what that means is it's defined at this level because it will be used across multiple methods in the main activity class. So this binding variable is going to be used across everything in this main activity class. So we're going to declare it right here. What does this late init keyword do? Well, it's a promise that your code will initialize the variable before using it, right? So if you don't, well, your app is going to crash because that's a sign for your compiler that this guy did something wrong, right? So it's a sanity check for yourself that you're setting, saying that binding should always be initialized, always. So you know how you get exceptions sometimes when you're trying to use a variable that hasn't been initialized. Well, late init is like a double check saying that in the code, while you're writing your code itself, it'll tell you, initialize before you do anything else in the function that you want to use your variable binding in. Well, what is activity main binding? Well, it's just a package. And this package is what allows us to be able to interact with the front end from the back end. Why is it in red? Because I haven't imported the package yet. And what's been imported yet? It's only these two things here. So in order to import it, all I'm going to do is I'm going to select it, right? And then there's a shortcut, which is Alt-Enter. And it allows me to see what the error is. And then it's going to, wow, I would assume that it allowed me to input it, but I guess not. Let me see why. Interesting. All right, so maybe as we go through it more, and then we'll find out why that's happening. But right now, the exception that's being thrown is unresolved reference. So pretty much there's no class for activity main binding, but there should be one if we imported the right package. But we'll see why that exception is being thrown, and we'll deal with it. So so we won't worry about it for now. Now let's see what this is doing, right? Binding equals this on create, this stuff here. This is just telling you what happens when you like run it. So main activity is what deals with the main structure of your code, if you will. The main aspects of that module. So in this case, there's only one module and it's tip time. So we're only dealing with the main activity of tip time. So on create, what does it do on create? Well, this is what it does on creation of the module. Binding equals activity main binding dot inflate. What does this do here? Layout inflator. Well, it initializes the binding object, which we'll use to access in views in the activity main XML, right? So this is what allows us to see what's happening in this XML doc where we laid everything out. Because if we want to reference some strings there, then we're going to need something like this that allows us to see what's happening, right? And then we're setting this content view, right? And then this content view activity. So instead of passing the resource ID of the layout, which is what we talked about earlier, which was the presentation, right? Which was right here. Instead of doing this find view by ID, this is what helps us avoid that. This is what specifies the root of the hierarchy of the views in your app. So it's basically saying, set the content view to binding.root, which means that when I bind, start from the root, which means the parent of the class. Don't go somewhere like you have to tell it where to start from, because it won't know otherwise. You have to tell it certain things. So you're saying that you start from the root because someone else might want to start from a different attribute, from a different class. I want to start from this ID here or this here, or bigger scale applications, you might need something like that. But in this case, we're just going to start from the root of the XML. And I'm going to split it here, and I'm going to this will help us understand what's going on a little better. All right. So left is back end, right is front end, guys, for now. All right. So so binding.root, and then you have this is like, I would say, the main, like the bare bones of the activity. This is what is a setup for the front end to be able to access the back end. And I'm going to be dealing with this exception in a bit. I hope it comes up later, and then we can fix it together. All right, so let's see. Now what we want to do is we want to calculate the dip. So we initialized the binding object, right? We initialize it right here. This late init stands for late initialization. Sorry, so we initialize it here. Right. So we initialize the binding object right here, and then we told the code what to do when you create the module and bind, right? So it's saying that, and actually rather, instead of binding, I should say access activity right? And it's saying access that, and then you're going to that is pretty much all that's all this is doing. And this is telling us to start at a certain point, and this is allowing us to see what's going on here. And yeah, so this is, I would say, the core structure that we're going to be working with. And I think I know why this is happening, by the way, so I think we're going to fix it in a bit. So now what you want to do is, it says click listener. Why did I put click listener in there? Click listener is a pretty much, I would say, like what how does the app know what to do when you click something, right? So so it that's what it's referred to when you say you're accessing something, or when you say you are you are pretty much aware of the events that are happening. So in this case, or in most programming languages and in most programming constructs, it's called listening. So you're listening to what's happening, and you are aware of what's happening. And when I say you, I mean the backend. So the backend is aware and listening to what is happening in the front end. So in order to be doing that, what we're going to do, we're going to add a event listener by binding dot wait button, right? And then we're going to do the keyword for setting a click listener is set on click listener. I think that's what it is. Yeah, since it's not throwing an exception, I'm confident. That's what it is, I hope. And then I do calculate it. So what all this is doing right now, guys, is, what is this right here that I added? This is something new. Calculate tip. What is that? So that is a function that I'm going to be calling or defining later. So on click, so all this is saying is bind to calculate button and then listen for a click. And if there is a click, then calculate the tip. And it's not going to calculate anything yet because I haven't even made the function. So let's make a function. How do you make a function in Kotlin? It's fun. I don't know if you guys have dealt with Python, but it's pretty similar to that. And it's like I would say like it's like a mix with JavaScript and Python, but it's so like straightforward that even if you don't know in language, you could easily start out with Kotlin, I think, at least. So you see the red went away, right? And because now the function's been declared, and now it knows that, oh, there's a function there somewhere. And then what we do is we want to add stuff in the calculate tip, right? So now what do we do when we want to get what's inside what's inside the field, right? So what's inside this text, this edit text here, what's inside there? How do we grab that? How do we grab what's happening here? Well, in order to do that, first thing we need to do is declare a variable, because everything needs to be stored in a variable, right? And then I'm going to call that string in text field, right? And I'm going to call that string in text field, and then I'm going to call my binding again, and then I'm going to say cost of service. Now, cost of service is what it's called. You can easily refer to them by just its name, but in camel case. So that's the whole idea, guys. That's the whole benefit of doing all this setup initially, so that you can easily just refer to these things without having to think too much of what the freaking ID is and how do I, grab it and whatnot. So just like that, all it has to be is in camel case, and then boom, right? And you should be, but this is enough to be able to grab it. Now I'm going to declare another variable, which is called val. All I'm doing is adding logic to actually calculate the cost, right? So cost, and then I'm going to convert this string. Now, guys, why aren't you asking yourself why I'm grabbing like string? Because isn't it like a double calculation? Shouldn't it be a calculation between two floats, or if anything, at least two numbers or integers, right? Would you agree with me there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So cost would have to be an interaction between numbers. So in order to do that, I'm going to convert the string that I just grabbed into a double. And that is, if you've dealt with Java, then it's the same actually. Then it's string with the variable that I just declared. I'm gonna reference that, right? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call a function on it. It's called toDouble. Boom. Make sure that you don't do any semicolons. Clearly, there are no semicolons. I know I did that mistake a few times, and I actually couldn't figure it out, and then wasted a lot of my time. So, semicolons might be a problem when you're typing in Kotlin. So make sure you're not in the habit of doing that too often. And then now it's going to convert the string into a double, but this what we're getting is also not a string, because what is the input type here? It's a number. So when it grabs it, it's not going to grab a number. It's going to grab text. It's going to grab it's going to grab it in text form. So I'm going to convert this in string, so that when I convert this into string, then in this into double, it should all work out, right? Because I'm converting a string to a double. In this case, when it's limited to just grabbing, you're just grabbing what's in there. So you're not defining a type yet. So once I do that, now it's set to a certain type, and now I'm converting it to a double. Boom. So now I have my cost, right? Now I need to get the percentage of the tip, right? Because how do I know what percentage of each tip is? How do I know 20% of 52 is what? How do I know 18% of 52 is what? So how does the code know what to do with that? So to specify that, all we do is we do val selected ID. Now, selected ID is what I'm referring to here is selected radio button, right? I'm going to bind it to the radio group, which is, in this case, tip options, right? Right here, tip options, right here. So selected ID is going to fall under the parent class, tip options, right? It's going to be checked, radio button. Now, what is this checked radio button ID? Pretty self-explanatory. It's to check whatever is going to be checked. In this case, this is the default checked, but whenever the user selects something else, it's going to know that this is what's being checked, right? And well, that's so far for just the calculate tip part. So far, I hope we're all on the same page. And then we're going to make another variable called tip percentage. Also, you'll notice like a lot of it's being suggested to me. That's because I've written, I've done this before, so it like remembers, I think, of what I called my variables, and I'm just using the same, so it knows. But yeah, but I guess accept that one. But and then I do, so here what you want to do is pretty much assign the each of these buttons to a certain percentage, or percentage to a double would be just a floating number, right? So how do I assign it to something like that? All I do is do when selected ID. So what this allows me to do is that it's like a you could say that you could use an if-else expression here, but it's much easier with a when expression, because with an if-else expression, you're doing if, and then sometimes compilers might force you to have an else, and some compilers might also not actually an else, but some compilers might actually force you to have a return statement. And when you don't have a return statement, sometimes programs can crash. But when doesn't force you to do that. So I'm going to just use when selected ID. So what is selected ID? It's the check radio button, right? Because that's the variable that I initialized there. So when selected ID, and then I'm encapsulating the when in a in parentheses, and I'm going to say, or curly brackets, curly braces, and I'm going to say option 20%. I don't know if you guys remember, but I told you what that RID does. All it does is extracts the value from the selected in this case radio button, right? So what will be the value that I want to pull? Can anyone tell me for the 20%? What will be the double? What will be the number?
0.2.
Yes, sir. So it will be 0.20. I'm going to just do 0 because I don't want it to. I'm going to be more specific. So, but 0.2 would work as well. But I'm going to go with 0.20 for now because 20%. So I guess it just seems more consistent. But that is the correct answer. And this arrow here, this is something special, guys. You guys should look it up. This arrow here is basically an assignment operator, and all it's doing is saying that extract it, declare a variable, and then assign it. So instead of having to write all of that, instead of writing a whole function, or not a function, but instead of writing a whole, actually it would be a function. So instead of calling the function and then encapsulating it again and making it all messy, JavaScript is what actually came out with this in ES6, which is a version of JavaScript, which is a more latest version of JavaScript, which allows you to use arrow functions to assign numbers like that. So since we are allowed to use this here, so we're going to use it, right? Because it's pretty convenient. And then we would do RID. Same thing, right? So same thing we did, and then we're going to assign it to 0.18. Same thing again with the last one. But here, instead of calling option 15%, what can I do that is a shorter, it's a much shorter way to do it? I'm exhausted. I have 3 options. I've exhausted 2 of those options. There's only 1 left. So what can I do here? Instead of having to call the 10% or the 15%.
Could you make it so the default option is the last one? So if it isn't the other 2
exactly,
cases,
right?
Cool.
Exactly. Yeah. So you would make the default option as the last one, and the syntax for that is else. You just make it 0.15, not 15, but 0.15. Good job. That's awesome. So we're almost there, guys. So we're all almost assigned. We just assigned all of the values of these radio buttons to their respective numbers, and look at that. We're getting there. So thank you for volunteering to answer that, Justin. I appreciate that. And next we have to actually calculate the tip. Right now, we've not done anything here. We've not done any calculation here. We've just assigned things. So in order to actually calculate the tip, first thing, get out of this condition. So close the bracket, get out of there, right? And then you want to initialize another variable called tip, and then you want to say tip percentage into cost, right? And what is tip percentage? This is tip percentage. What is cost? Cost is right here. We just converted whatever's being input in the cost of service into a double, and we did that. Boom. Right? Simple. Let me know, guys. Feel free to stop me. And then we're going to add another feature for roundup, and we're going to do the same thing we did if binding.roundup switch is checked. Right? We're going to say if roundup. Now I'll tell you what I'm doing here, right? And tip equals this might seem familiar to some. All I'm doing here is I assigned roundup to this if it's checked. Now this is not actually a condition. All this is doing is assigning roundup to a variable, is declaring roundup as a variable, and is assigning the checked radio, or is assigning the checked switch to the roundup. right? So if it's not checked, then it would still assign it to roundup. If it's checked, it would still assign it to roundup. Now, in the case that it's checked and it returns a true Boolean, is checked is a Boolean function. So in the case that it returns a true Boolean function, do this, right? What is this? Well, it is just rounding it. That's all it's doing. This is the library you got to call to round it. In Java, you would use I think you can use floor, and there's also I think floor and seal, and there's truncate and all that stuff. So this is what you use in Kotlin. And I think there's ceiling in Java too, actually. Yeah, and then well, from there, you actually want to display the tip, right? And in order to display the tip correctly, what you want to do is val. Now, if you're wondering why I declared a variable here instead of a val, is because variable tip we know for a fact is going to be a number, right? Now, when you're sorry, we don't know for a fact if variable is going to be a value. So for in this case, because we have a function nested inside this and we don't know for sure what's happening, then we can say that, okay, let's be on the safer side and say variable tip instead of saying val. Although we do know it's always going to be a double, that's why we have a val roundup here, right? And that's what it's going to return. But since we're nesting a function, or so now we're not necessarily nesting a function, but we're nesting a condition inside this, and we're doing stuff with the tip. So it's safer to declare it as a variable than a value. Then we're going to do val roundup. All right. And then we're going to oh, sorry, no. We calculated tip. Let's see where we're at. Okay, so we got to format the tip and then display the tip. So we got to format now. So in order to format the tip, all we have to do is use another library, right? It's called number format. So I'm going to do val formatted tip and number format. Then get currency instance and dot format. The syntax in order to be able to format. And then what do? Then we display, right? So in order to display, this is what we do. So you have to understand that the core construct of a lot of this, what's happening here, is a very key value pair oriented kind of deal. Because you'll notice that from the beginning, I'm always assigning binding to a certain, declaring a variable, assigning, declaring a variable, assigning, declaring a variable, assigning, performing action, again assigning, declaring a variable, assigning, performing action. So the performing action part is actually very less. But what's more, the chunk of the code is the declaring part and the initializing part. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the program needs to be aware of a lot of the things that are happening before it can do something with the things that are happening, right? So first, we got to make them aware of what's happening. And that is what I'm going to do again, is when I call minding dot tip result, right? I'm going to say dot text, and I'm going to say get string, right? I'll explain what I'm doing here. And string and tip amount, I think, and then formatted tip. Right. So I know this is all in red, but we're going to fix that. And so here, right. So here, the reason why it's in red is because we need to understand that when we go to our strings.xml, right? When we're here and look at the strings.xml. So what this variable here is all it's doing is getting a string from the tip amount, and then it's a formatted tip. But at the same time, this here, the tip amount, does not have a per se like well, you know, it doesn't have, it's inserting it into the string, but it doesn't have a location to insert it. Like this result here is we're displaying it, right? But it's not going to display anything here if there's no empty space for it to display it. So can I just add a space bar and call it a day? No, I can't. I need some kind of an instantiation there. What do I do for that? Well, it's a percentage S. Now, if you guys know what string, sorry, C++ or C, then you know what this is. This is also legacy code where you can say percentage and S stands for give me string, right? And if I do F, then it stands for float. If I do a double, D is double, and you know, but in this case we need a string, so I'm going to do string, and boom, the red, all of it is gone. This is what you should have so far in the code in the backend. Activity main binding is still being a little pain. We're going to fix that. Don't worry. All right, so let's actually, let's go to let's actually go to our main activity XML here. And the final few steps, guys, stick with me here. And here, what we're going to do is when we go to our tip amount, which is, I think, where was our tip amount? Which is, I think, when I say tip amount, I mean the placeholder that was right below, right here, right? By the way, notice how it changed here too, right? So it's basically, well, it's the code itself is not changed, but it's being nice and it's telling me what it is going to go there, right? So instead of having the text as like right here like that, what we're going to do is going to add another placeholder. So for when the tip amount is not been entered, then this is what it's going to display, right? So for once, it's actually called freaking placeholder. Oh no, it's not. I don't think it is. I think it's like tools. I think it's placeholder. Is it? Nope. I think it's just text. But so it's just text, and then you put in tip amount, and then you do whatever default text you want. So that almost we're done here. But if I can only figure out what the activity main building is causing. So don't you worry, I have code that is fully functional and working. And since we've reached the end, I'm going to see why that's happening just right here in a second. Give me 1 minute. Okay, yeah, I didn't. That's what I thought. I didn't import it, but it was not giving me an option to import it. So guys, I was right. So you don't. I didn't import it, but you could see here that when I did that, it didn't give me an option. So I'm going to just import it manually. That should, I think. Oh, what's bundle number? Format. Data binding. Resolve reference. Give me 1 second here, guys. Stick with me. Android X bundle. Well, you know what? I'm not going to waste your guys' time and mine. So I'm going to bring up the solution that's actually working, and we're going to see what's different here. And you're going to see actually that there's nothing different, and you're going to see that it's like the same. But yeah, let me just split it like it was earlier. And but yeah, that's why you have backup code, guys, when you're presenting. But so this is the same thing that we're doing. It's all the same, guys. Nothing's changed here, clearly. So all we're gonna do, oh, this in here, I just added the text as the thing. I didn't want it to, you know, I didn't want to use the tools text, but we can do that. I think it's a good practice to have a placeholder like that. So yeah, so let's see what we get when we run it, guys. We might completely crash the system, or we might get a fully working tip calculator, which was not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make a food app, but this is one element of it. It's a good way to it's a good way to start, get some input, get things done. Let's see what we get. Let's wait for it to finish build. And I can also, guys, I can show you the food app because I have it ready here. Oh, see, look, I messed up. It's saying percentage s instead of actually yeah, I don't know. Interesting. Let's see, what if I do this? So it's calculating it, but the placeholder is messed up, right? I'll just quit if I don't have anything interesting. Oh, it's stopped for some reason. But yeah, there's something wrong with my strings.xml here. Oh, okay. So I think that's why I might have actually done that, because I think my versions, there might be some version deprecation going on here. There might be some versions that are depreciated and don't actually work with the tools text, because it might be a newer library. Stuff like that might arise depending on your version, but most of it should work out. So I'm going to save this and run again, and we'll see if that works. So there might be what I was trying to say was there might be some version consistency with I'm trying to do with the program versus what kind of version of the studio I have, and if that build or if that package is if the version of Kotlin is actually consistent with what I'm trying to achieve. Sometimes it might not be. So yeah, the tip amount is now, well, it shows up just for that, and then if I click that, oh, I think that's something's wrong. Sorry, my bad. But yeah, that's what most of this code was trying to achieve. This is you would get by the end of your program. The main objective was for you to be able to understand how the backend and front end interact with each other, and how you can actually get input. Click certain buttons and decide whether or not it toggles, and based on that, print and output for the food app, the scrolling list, so that you can get a little more excited for next time we do something like this. Because I also have that here, and maybe we can get that running once this is done. But yeah, there's some, and also it might be that the fact that I'm like, there might be some overlay in terms of me making a new project and in the existing project having the same variable names. But let me also show you the food app once that's done running here. And feel free to ask me any questions in the meantime. If you have any questions, I will go through a complete overview of what I covered, like a quick summary, if you will. And I don't think it's feasible to. So this is what I was going to show you. This is a scrollable list of food, which you should be able to click, and it'll say the order has been placed, and it'll also say you can give the tip and, so other cool stuff like that when navigation comes in the next unit. But it seems like, the scope is too vast for me to be able to cover everything in enough time, in spite of me making it as concise as I could. But a quick overview, I would say, would be that we went through covering, calculating the tip by enabling the view by initializing the binding object. And we covered event listener. We covered how we can pull in the cost of service and how we can define these two functions and do something with them. And these three here, the B, C, D, they're all three are functions. We formatted the tip and then we displayed the tip. And I was, like I said, going to cover the rest of the app, but it seems like we're really stretching it in terms of time, and it can get exhaustive to cover so much in this little time. But if you guys have any other concerns, comments, questions, feedback is more than welcome, actually. And yeah, let me know. Feel free to jump in and ask me to review any of the code that I just did, if you wish. But yeah, it's 2 hours, 30 minutes. I don't want to make this any longer. So it's getting late too. So hungry. But yeah, I'm sure we can all share this presentation and you guys will have it with you. But if there's anything else, feel free to let me know. Thank you guys. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Can I ask a simple question?
Yeah, of course.
Do you need front end to be so? Do you need some of the front end to be done before working on the back end, or can you just work on the back end first and work on the front end?
Okay, so to that, I would say that you do need something on the front end. You cannot simply work on the back end, and unless if you want to work on a project, then you're going to have to have some front end knowledge, because otherwise, front end, if you look at the core of it, it's about being able to display, and if you can't display as basic as something as hello world, then your user is not going to be able to interact with your project or your application. So in order to enable that, you're going to have to learn the very basics of front end at least.
Okay, thank you.
And if you're working in a team, if you're working in a company that has their front end already built out, there are a lot of back end engineers that just do back end. They don't even touch the front end. So you could completely go into that too. But as far as personal projects and applications are concerned, you do need some front end knowledge.
All right, that's good. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think someone else had a question. I don't know if they still have that. But yeah, I mean, the next part with the list is pretty exciting, but to be honest, I like that. But let me know, guys, if you have anything else you want me to touch on real quick. Anything more basic that you want to brush up on that you thought went over your head? I'm not even checking the chat.
Does the link to the document you shared have all the code that you used to make the tip calculator?
So it doesn't have all the code. It was more of a reference to follow along. But like I said, I want to make it I want to make it more of a rigid documentation so I can add stuff that's like when someone else sees it who's not seen the presentation can immediately understand what's going on. So I will refine that document. So make sure you guys keep that link in handy and keep checking it, because I do want to eventually update it and get it to a state, at least before my next presentation, to state where you guys can look at it and see what's up. So I will be adding more stuff to it. Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
I was wondering, how exactly would you implement like a database to the backend? I don't know if that's too specific.
Oh, sorry. What was your question?
So if you have an application and you have a lot of people making accounts on their applications, so I assume that account information would be sent to some sort of database.
Yes.
So what kind of how would that look? You'd have the front end
Yeah.
and the front end
So
would
how that
send it
works
to the
is,
back end.
yeah, so awesome. Great question. So when it comes to simply putting information in the database, it boils down to understanding how you can interact with the database. So the front end is very, very limited in terms of pulling stuff directly from the database. That's the backend's job. All the front end does is interact with the backend and see, does the backend have the information from the database, and accordingly binds it to the front end. So you would have something called a view model in the middle, right? And the view model is like I would say, is where the transition pretty much happens. So the view model takes stuff, is still, so view model is still considered the backend, by the way. So still the backend takes that information, renders it, and then the front end looks at the view model and says, this is what I want to pull from the view model. Maybe not all of it, maybe some of it, and then this is what you pull, and then that's what you display. So the front end directly has very little control of what it does with the database. It's mainly the backend that interacts with it, yes. And when you say how would that look like, I would say it has to be injected. That is the proper term. There has to be, the database has to be injected into the backend, and that goes into the topic of injections, which is a little more advanced. But yeah, you would have to inject certain parts of the database into the backend to extract information and then pull it in the front end.
Okay.
Yep.
And how exactly would you, okay, so I assume you wouldn't necessarily just have to follow through with a waterfall approach, and you could use an agile approach. How exactly would you be able to do that? You know, wouldn't you in theory have like the conceptualization stage at the same time as you would have like the designing and construction stages?
So how would, so okay, so when you say as in a project overall, is what you're saying?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you have like a
So when you,
development team.
yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I get your question. So your question is like, what, if I boil it down, I would say your question says that does a project designer do? Or what does not a, I wouldn't say like a project designer, but it would be more like a system designer. And what a system designer has to do is pretty much look at all the elements that encapsulate a full stack application. So what does a full stack application mean? It means, right? So when you say a full stack developer or a system design expert, they have to be an expert in the front end, they have to be an expert in the back end, and they have to be an expert in handling databases. So you would think of, when you go to a system design interview, they ask you, how would you build Twitter? So you have to think of questions like, how would I build Twitter? Do I go to, good night, Justin. Do I go to, um, the database first? How do I interact with the back end, the front end? So first thing, conceptually, you would start thinking of the back end and how I would lay out my elements. Then you would try the interaction. So the front end, then would come the interaction with the back end or the database. The front end would be in the very, it would be the lesser of your concerns initially, because you're still trying to get a good framework of what's happening. So in the conceptual phase, you would think that how I would want data to go from A to B, right? And you would think of the scale. How many users are going to be using my application? Are they going to be a lot, like going to be huge, or are just going to be a few people? Is it targeted to a specific audience?
Mhm.
So those questions should pop up first thing, like what is the scale of the application? Okay, I know the scale of the application, so I know how many elements I need for the backend. If I know how many elements I need, I know what size of the database I need, what size of the cluster do I need. So, you start from there and you keep going.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you a
Hope that
lot.
helps. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, hit me up. This presentation, when it's sent out, my email's on there, my LinkedIn's on there. So feel free.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, my LinkedIn is actually just my name. It's not like there's a link on there, but yeah.
All right. Have a good night.
You too, man. Take care.